In 1828 Edinburgh, two men found a way to get rich by making sure the supply of fresh corpses never ran out. So they simply started making the dead themselves. To understand how, you have to understand the city. Edinburgh was the beating heart of medicine, and its anatomy schools drew students from all across the world. At the center of it stood one man, Dr. Robert Knox, the city's star anatomist. His lectures were the hottest ticket in Edinburgh, his theater packed with hundreds. And to keep it full, he needed a constant supply of the dead. But to teach surgery, they needed one thing above all else: fresh human bodies to open and study. And such bodies were desperately scarce. The law allowed only the corpses of executed criminals, a mere handful each year. Against hundreds of hungry students, it was almost nothing. So a dark trade rose to fill the gap. Men called resurrectionists crept into graveyards at night, dug up the freshly buried, and sold them to the schools. The whole city lived in fear of them. Families sat up for nights beside a new grave, guarding their own dead from the shovel. They locked coffins inside iron cages called mort safes, built watchtowers over the cemeteries, and hired armed guards. In Edinburgh, fear ruled the graveyard. And a single fresh corpse could fetch more than a laborer earned in weeks. In the anatomy trade, a body was simply money. Into this world came two Irish laborers, William Burke and William Hare. Hare ran a squalid lodging house in the slums, and Burke was his friend and tenant. It began by accident. An old army pensioner lodging with Hare died one night, still owing his rent, and Hare saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. They filled the coffin with bark, carried the real body to the university, and offered it to a celebrated anatomist, Dr. Robert Knox. He paid over £7 and asked nothing. £7. For a poor laborer, that was a small fortune, more than months of honest work, for a single night's grim errand. And there the idea turned monstrous. Why wait for a lodger to die on his own, when the city was full of people no one would ever miss? Their first was a sick tenant, feverish and failing. Rather than wait for the end, they hurried him along, with strong drink and a pillow, and the money came just the same. And they were not alone in it. Hare's wife, Margaret, and Burke's partner, Helen, knew what was happening, helped hide it, and shared in the money. It had become a quiet household trade. So they began to hunt. Their prey were the poor, the drunk, the lonely, the strangers passing through. Anyone who could vanish without a single soul asking where they'd gone. Their method was chillingly simple. Lure the victim in, fill them with drink until they were senseless, then suffocate them, one man on the chest, the other sealing the mouth and nose. It left no wound, no bruise, no sign of violence at all. A fresh, unmarked, perfect body, exactly what the anatomists paid the most for. The method would earn its own name: burking. One of the first they lured was Abigail Simpson, an old woman charmed with kindness and whiskey, then killed in the cold light of morning. It set the pattern for all the rest. Among the victims was Mary Haldane, an old woman of the streets. And not long after, her own daughter came looking for her missing mother, and was silenced in the very same way. A mother and her daughter, both sold to the same table. Again and again they did it. A drink, a smile, a quiet room, and another human being simply disappeared into the dissecting theater. One victim was Mary Patterson, young, striking, and known to half the city. When her body was laid on the slab, some of the students went pale. They had known her in life. And still, the questions died in that room. The body was too fresh, too perfect, too valuable. They cut, and they said nothing. Another was Daft Jamie, a gentle, disabled young man that all of Edinburgh knew and loved. He did not go quietly. He fought for his life to the very end. When his body appeared on the table, people knew his face at once. And it was whispered that the anatomist began with the head and the feet, the very parts that would have named him. But Jamie's disappearance was different. People missed him, asked after him, went looking. For the first time, the killers had taken someone the whole city would notice was gone. Recognizing the dead should have stopped everything. But the trade was too useful, and far too many people were willing to look away. Over roughly 10 months they killed again and again, as many as 16 people. feeding one of the most respected schools in Europe, one silent murder at a time. By now the word burking was on every tongue, and a new dread crept through the poor closes of the city, the fear of a friendly stranger, a free drink, and never being seen again. But greed makes men careless. Their final victim, a woman named Margaret Docherty, was killed in Burke's lodging while other guests were still in the house. Those guests, a couple named Gray, grew suspicious and searched the room, and found her body hidden beneath a heap of straw. Burke and Hare offered them money to stay silent. The Grays refused and went straight to the police. By the time the officers arrived, the body was already gone, sold and delivered. But it was too late. The whole grim enterprise had begun to unravel. The evidence, though, was dangerously thin. Without a confession, the case against them might collapse entirely. So the authorities made a devil's bargain. They offered Hare his freedom if he would testify against his partner. Hare took the deal without a flicker of hesitation and turned every horror onto Burke. And so William Burke alone stood trial for the murders, while the man who had knelt beside him at every killing walked away a free man. Beside Burke in the dock stood Helen MacDougall. But Scottish law had a third verdict, not proven, a way of saying, we know, but cannot prove it. On those two words, she too walked free. On Christmas Day, Burke was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to hang, and ordered that his own body afterward be publicly dissected. In his cell, waiting to die, Burke finally confessed it all: the names, the numbers, the method. The full horror of what they had done came out only from the mouth of the one man about to hang for it. Edinburgh, sickened and enraged, poured into the streets. Some 25,000 people came to watch him die. When he dropped, the vast crowd roared its approval. And even then their fury wasn't spent. People fought over scraps of the rope and shavings of the gallows, carrying off grim little souvenirs of the monster's end. Then came the fitting justice. Burke's body was carried to the very anatomy hall that had bought his victims and dissected in public, exactly as they had been. So many wanted to see it that thousands filed past his open body for hours. To this day, his skeleton still stands in an Edinburgh museum, beside a small book bound in his own tanned skin. The hunter had become the specimen. The horror even spread. A few years later, imitators in London tried the very same trade, luring and burking a boy to sell to the anatomists. The murders had become a method. Hare, meanwhile, walked free and vanished into legend, hounded by mobs, chased out of the city, and never punished for a single death. And Dr. Knox, who bought every body and asked nothing, was never charged in any court. But the public delivered its own verdict. They burned him in effigy, mobbed his house, and destroyed his brilliant career. Yet the true horror was never just 3 guilty men. It was the system that made them possible. Out of the outrage came reform, a new law, the Anatomy Act, that let bodies be given to science and drained the market that had paid for murder. Fear had ruled the graveyard. In the end, it was law and reason that finally emptied it.